stay on. The green light doesn't stay. It doesn't stay on.
We can hear it.
Only if I push my.
No, you got to keep your finger.
Doesn't go.
You have to hold it down the entire time while you're talking.
Wow.
Ending on being very brief, I'm calling the joint meeting of the Architectural Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission to order. Roll call, please.
Madam Chair, we have the roll call for both the Planning Commission and the AAC. I'll go through the roll call for the Planning Commission first. Commissioner Donenfeld.
Present.
Commissioner Hirschbein is excused. Commissioner Hudson.
Present.
Commissioner Maruzzi.
Here.
Commissioner Woods. Vice Chair Callardine.
Present.
Chair Wehrmuck.
Here.
And then on the AAC, we have Member Lockyer,
Here.
Member Rotman,
Here.
Member Jakeway.
Present.
Member McCoy is excused. Member Dosey. Member Payline.
Here.
Vice Chair Cassidy.
Present.
And Chair Song is excused. Madam Chair, as we are not taking any action today, we don't actually need full quorums of both bodies, but we do have quorums present.
Do we need a report in the posting of the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, the agenda was posted on, Thursday of last week. This meeting has been noticed and posted in accordance with state law.
Okay, we are at public comment. This time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Planning Commission and the Architectural Advisory Committee on the. In front of us, the only item we have is 1A, discussion and review of 50% design development drawings for the downtown park. Is there a member of the public that would like to speak? There being none. But if we have time at after you've heard the presentation, I will open it back up. So we're going into the discussion and review of 50% design development drawings for the downtown park. Just a comment for people here before I call for the staff report. This item by the council was sent to a combined committee that included several boards and commissions. Both of our boards have representatives on that body, but we did, and so this will be the only meeting. There's been some time set aside for both of our commissions to comment. Our comments will be forwarded to the full committee and to the architects who are involved, but this will be the only comment period that we have. Staff report.
Madam Chair, you stole my report. I was going to give a little bit of background, especially for members of the AAC who have not been as involved in this, perhaps. There is a City Council subcommittee that is meeting and reviewing the drawings for the park. That is composed of Mayor Pro Tem Roberts and Councilmember Holstage. We have both Planning Commission and AAC representatives on that subcommittee. Our Planning Commission representatives are Chair Wehrmuck and Commissioner Hirschbein. And then from the AAC, we have Member Lockyer and Member McCoy, who are representing the AAC. And so they have been in attendance at the subcommittee meetings and have offered comments on the plans as they've reviewed them. At our most recent subcommittee meeting, there was a request by the subcommittee members to have a combined study session of the Planning Commission and the AAC so that you all could comment on the 50% design development drawings that we have before us, and then forward those comments back to the larger subcommittee. And so that is our purpose today, is to get your comments on the 50% design development drawings. I will summarize those comments and forward those to the subcommittee, and so I'll be acting as the secretary today to do that. You also have your subcommittee representatives who will assist me in sharing those comments with the larger subcommittee, and so I'm appreciative to them to also assist me in that function. Just by way of background, the City Council approved the schematic design for the park back in October of 2017 after public input sessions on the design of the park. Last summer, our consultant, Rios Clemente Hale Studios, did both sessions with the public and then also did an online survey of what the park should be. And as part of those public comment sessions, they came back with two themes that were the strongest in terms of receiving votes from the public. The first theme was of a healing oasis, and the second one was the common grounds theme, or a place for gathering. And so based on that input, they developed a design that, again, was approved by the City Council in October of 2017. And now we're in the process of refining those designs, putting a budget to it, and determining the exact details of the park. Let me go ahead and go through the presentation that was presented to the subcommittee. And what I will do is I'll just ask the subcommittee members, those of you who've seen it, if there's anything that I leave out in my review or discussion, if you would just add your comments in, because again, I won't do quite as good of a job as Rios Clemente Hale does in terms of the presentation today. Let me just start with an overview of the layout of the park. Again, this is one of the blocks within the downtown project, immediately adjacent to the parking structure, which is shown here on the north part of the plan, or the upper portion of the plan. The Palm Springs Art Museum is to the west, or on the left side of the plan. The future site of the Virgin Hotel is on the east, or on the right side of the plan. And then we have Museum Way, the street which runs towards the Art Museum there at the bottom of the park design. Within the park itself, there are about 5 different elements. Furthest to the east is the plaza where the Forever Maryland statue might be located at some point in the future. We have an area called the Palm Grove, which is at the southeast corner of the site. At the southwest corner of the site is an area called the Theater, or the Event Lawn. We also have an area called the Outcrop, which is primarily used to screen the parking structure from the park. And then we have the Spring, which will be a water feature, active water feature. And so that's the general layout of the park design. Looking at the hardscape materials on the site, the consultants looked at the color of the surrounding landscape, and we'll be using that as a basis for the materials in the park itself. You'll see at the bottom of this page we have a different variety of sizes of rock materials using the Palm Springs Gold. That will include both boulders. It will also have 4 to 8 inch rubble, 3/4 inch aggregate, as well as decomposed granite. In terms of the concrete paving materials for the site, it's going to be a buff colored concrete, and so it's going to match the same color tone as the Palm Springs Desert Gold. And then at the very eastern part of the site, the Art Plaza area, we'll use the pavers that we have currently within the sidewalk areas of the downtown project, which is a gray tone, but it has kind of a gold undertone to it, so it will match or coordinate with the Desert Gold. One of the things that's very unique about this design is the design of the benches within the park. These are actually going to be cast benches, and they're going to be using what we call a sedimentary finish technique to these. And there's been much discussion about how durable these are, will they have a rough finish to them, et cetera. And so those have all been concerns expressed by the subcommittee members to these. But you'll notice here in the illustration at the bottom right that they are going to be varying in height, so I think between about 18 inches and 24 inches in height for seating. They will have these powder-coated metal armrests that will be used, so seniors getting up have some way to boost themselves up. Also, it helps to prevent skateboarders from trying to go up and down the benches as well.
And the armrests are covered with a material so that they won't get hot. That was one of the concerns of the group,
Yeah.
and they've done a lot of research on how to do that.
Yeah. And I believe that the sedimentary finish will also have a finish to it that's a protective coat that will prevent additional wear on that surface.
And it will also indent a bit under the benches so that people don't scratch themselves on it, and it doesn't get marred by people rubbing up against it.
You'll see in the site plan there on the upper right, the pink color, as it's showing here on my screen, is the locations of where those benches will be located. And so you can see that they're used throughout the site, serving sometimes as seating, and then also on the portion adjacent to the parking garage, they'll serve as retaining walls and seating. And so they kind of have a dual purpose. Let me talk first about the palm grove in terms of the materials and the design of that area of the site. Again, this is at the southeast area of the site. The consultant did shade studies of this to determine if the planting pattern for the palms would have adequate shading of the site during the summer months, also thinking about how it would be during the winter months. In reviewing these diagrams, one of the things that the subcommittee as a whole had a concern about was that they're not taking into account the mountain effect, that during the winter about 3:30 p.m. we start getting the shadow that will come across the park. A little bit later during the summer months. So we have asked them to go back and take a look at the shade study and incorporate the effect of the mountain on the site. That will play into our comments later on in terms of the shading. There were comments from the subcommittee about having perhaps some type of shade structures in the park as well.
And what I will do is take comments if people have questions about a specific page as we go through it. So Lynn,
Has this taken into account both the shading from the Virgin Hotel and I would assume whatever structure gets built on what was the old Marriott site across Museum Way? I don't know what it's.
Yeah, I don't believe that it does, and that's a good point. The Virgin Hotel, we know the massing and the height of that structure, so that could be incorporated. On Block F, which is the parcel to the south where the AC Marriott was originally planned to go and will be multifamily in the future, we don't know the massing of that yet, but that's
We could
important to take into
assume,
consideration.
we could assume for purposes of this analysis, though, that it would have the same massing as the AC Marriott.
This is something along those lines, yes.
we should ask them to assume shade with the massing of what's allowed under the specific plan, which I believe is 6 stories, but I could be wrong on that.
Mr. Donenfeld?
I just have a quick question on the concrete benches. With respect to the amphitheater environment, the concrete benches are meant to supplement the lawn seating in the areas where it's directly across from the stage, and there's just 2 rows of that. Is that correct? It doesn't go up any higher than that.
That's correct, yes.
We will get to a full page on that if we can go. If
Okay.
We can let.
Okay.
Looking at the proposed trees for the Palm Grove area, there are 3 different types of palms proposed. There are the Washingtonian filifera, there is the Washingtonian filibusta, which is the hybrid, and then there is also a shorter, and I always pronounce this incorrectly, Oaxaca palm, which we'll use as an understory. You can see in your illustrations and here on the screen, the darkest color for the palms is the filiferas, the lighter green color is the filibustas in terms of their locations, and then the yellow color is the short understory palms. And so that is the proposed layout of the palms. In terms of their initial installation, they'll vary in height from 10 feet to 18 feet of brown trunk height upon installation. And I think the discussion also was to keep a number of them with the skirts or the bearded condition. One of the things that they wanted to do, the consultants wanted to do, is to kind of keep the natural character that we see up in the Indian Canyons area. And so they wanted to have some of those be bearded to kind of carry that theme through the site. And so it will have more of a natural appearance rather than a groomed appearance. You can also see that in the layout of the palms, as it's a very organic layout rather than regimented or a formal layout. In terms of the understory plantings in the Palm Grove area, you see the list of materials here. There were a couple of considerations that they looked at, and that was in terms of the color tones. As you can see in the chart at the left and then at the bottom of the site, they wanted a variety of colors, and I'll talk a little bit more about the color theme later on as we get into some of the site elements. But the plant materials are to coordinate with the overall color theme that is being used within the park itself. Another thing that they wanted to do was to make sure that there was some color during all seasons of the year. And so as you look at the chart at the bottom of the page, giving you an idea of what the colors will be during the different months of the year. Again, the idea to have color throughout the year. And then also looking at what types of birds, butterflies, and things that those plant materials would attract to the park was another consideration that they gave to those plantings.
A little concern about the color. Is this going to be a major bee attractant, and has that been looked at? Are we going to have pretty large mobs of bees and stuff?
Well, you will see from the images there on the page, they indicate both birds, butterflies, and then you'll see a bee symbol there on certain plants. So there are certain plants that will attract bees. I don't believe that it's going to be an issue overall, though.
And there will be some kind of vector control with the city park department. Having had killer bees on my property, I know you can get rid of them pretty quickly.
I'll next go into the area that's probably the most controversial about the park design. This is labeled here as the Forever Maryland Plaza. One of the things that the subcommittee recommended is that instead of calling it the Forever Maryland Plaza, that we call it the Art Plaza. And so there will be a name change there. The intent is that there will be a location for the Forever Maryland statue if we are able to obtain it. If we aren't able to obtain it, then we'll have room for other art pieces that could be located there. One of the reasons that the consultants kept it to a side of the park is that they wanted to offer an Instagram moment for visitors who enjoy that statue. While not keeping it within the center of the park, it allows the park for other uses that we have our gathering spaces, et cetera, and the statue is off to a side of that. And so that's the proposed location. Again, the pavers here will be the same that are used in the sidewalk areas elsewhere in the downtown project. Street trees will be consistent along the Bellardo Wayside as well as Museum Wayside.
And Grit will be paying for the pavers and installing them, which is a savings to the city of about $250,000.
Flynn, was there any concern on the part of the subcommittee that the hard space around Maryland is a bit large, considering the fact that this is a park and we want to make it as soft as possible? Because if Maryland comes, I assume that the rest of it will just be open, hard space with not much. I thought originally Maryland was going to come out of some palm trees or something where she wouldn't be as noticeable and there wouldn't be as. What would this hard space be used for other than just walking up to her and having pictures taken?
You know, I see a variety of uses there, that during festivals and events, it gives us space for booths, for kiosks, things like that. So I do see it as being a multi-purpose space, and having a hard surface certainly helps with being able to do that.
And there was no concern that it was a bit large for the site?
Actually, no, I don't believe that there were any comments, and maybe Sean or Kathy, if you remember any comments relative to that. I don't believe that there were.
There wasn't, but I see the argument now that it's a lot of hard surface.
Yeah.
Although, I like your response also, Flynn. One of the other issues that did come up was potential staging area for festivals and satellite, like portable toilets and things like that. I don't think that was ever resolved, but when Flynn brought up his counter argument, I felt like maybe this is an area where that has potential also.
So let's present that back to the larger subcommittee as a concern from the
Because
general group.
my concern would be this can't be really used as back of the house, assuming there's a festival or something going on and you need additional porta potties or whatever. This is right at the beginning of, if you're coming from Palm Canyon, this is how you meet the park. So you wouldn't want to be meeting the park with all sorts of utilitarian things there.
The only other thing is, I think the idea was if art came in and it wasn't Maryland, it would be Instagrammable art, things that are coming from Coachella or Desert X, so that they would be fun and things that people could photograph.
With the Maryland location, are we going to have any safety issues with people trying to stage pictures, needing to go out into Bellardo for the camera person to be there? Just might pass that along to the designers.
Yeah, we will. She, again, will be facing, people will be taking pictures from the south. That's the primary vantage point for taking pictures rather than from the east in the street. But certainly we will pass that along.
A question, as we go through this, Flynn, is it possible to get an idea of what size these different areas are, a scale of it? So the Palm Grove, how much area it is, it's either acreage or dimensions, and the same with this?
Yeah, I'll apologize. Unfortunately, I don't have the acreage for each of those individual elements. But that's certainly something that we can ask the consultant to provide to us, and I can forward that information to you all. Peter asked me that earlier, and I'm sorry, I don't know right off the top of my head.
I had a question, if there was any discussion on Museum Way. I know one of the goals was to create that as a boulevard that led to the museum, but in this proposed design, there's pavers on the south side of the street, along the adjacent to the street, but they're not on the park side. And I feel that the way the pavers are ending in the proposed design, it's almost like it's a right-of-way line or something, and we're having this straight edge. So for me, I think some better integration at the corner, or the possibility of carrying the pavers at least in the same width that's along the south side of the street all the way down to the museum, to again reinforce, because they've used the same type of trees, but reinforce that boulevard effect.
Okay, and I think we had discussed that in the subcommittee in terms of the treatment on both sides, and I thought there was a reason why they wanted to use the concrete on the north side, and I can't remember what that was right off the top of my head. We'll go ahead and take that comment back to them.
Regarding the large hardscape, I was just going to make the comment that if it's not Forever Maryland going in there and some other art piece or pieces, they may be spread multiple pieces throughout the hardscape space. So I've been trying to imagine a little more versatility in it. So maybe that's more justification for a little bit larger hardscape, just a possibility.
Going back to the question on the acreage, thankfully David Newell responded to my email. The parcel site is 1.47 acres. And so it's not a large parcel overall.
I just had one more comment on the size of the space. The large space that's on the south side of the street, I think we've seen that it functions pretty well. It almost feels like one of the better places, for events or vendors or whatever you want to do with it. So I think in scale or proportion, it's nice to have at least this hardscape area that can kind of relate to the downtown and be flexible with all the other softscape that's going to happen in the park. So I don't feel that it's too large.
Tom, you,
Excuse me, it looks to me like the hardscape under Forever Maryland is just a continuation of the hardscape from the site to the south. Please pass your mic. You gotta talk in the mic. I don't have the mic. It looks to me like the hardscape under Forever Maryland is just a continuation of the sidewalk-type hardscape on the vacant site to the south, and that might be why it seems large.
I just wanted to agree with both Toms on that. I thought it was appropriate because it matched, and that space is a nice space. It's already in existence, and it seems to work well.
Let me go ahead and move on to the next portion of the site. This is at the southwest corner, the event lawn, or the theater space, as they are calling it. The consultants analyzed the use of the space in a number of different ways. You'll see on the left hand of this image using it for a standing capacity crowd And then on the right-hand page, if we were to actually put in seats and have a seated audience. And so they anticipate with a seated audience, you could have about 350, 400, 450, somewhere in there, with folding seats in the lawn area. And then you also have the additional benches, the site benches there at the rear of the site on the slope. For a standing audience, you could get approximately 500 to 600 in there. One of the things that they have also taken into consideration and the subcommittee had comments on, if we were to close the streets around that, would it still function as an event space? What you will see with the design of the pavilion, let's see, let me go there, that the pavilion or the shade structure over the raised stage area is essentially open on all sides, and so it could function in a number of different ways. They also looked at how to use that raised stage. Again, this is a very low stage. I believe it's about 24 inches max above the area on the site. They looked at it for a concert configuration, chamber orchestra configuration, theater dance configuration. And so they have taken different configurations into account in terms of the area of the stage itself and the shape of the stage. Going back to the shade structure over the stage, this is again to also reflect sound as well as provide shade for the performers there on the stage itself. The design of the structure is to mimic palm frond patterns, and that's what provides the shade. And you can see from the colors there on the upper right that it will be a combination of those colors on the shade structure itself, again tying into the overall theme of the greens and the yellows that are being used throughout the site.
I have a couple questions. With respect to the seating, very typically when you have a lawn kind of a theater experience, people want to come with blankets and all sorts of things to set up and enjoy the event. Obviously, this is not going to be large enough if you want maximum seating capacity for something like that to occur. How do they plan, maybe this is too premature of a question, but how do they plan on limiting it to kinds of seating arrangements where you can maximize seating either by standing only or a regimented line of chairs?
You know, it kind of depends on the events and how we plan to run the events. You know, for smaller concerts, spreading out blankets will be fine. For larger concerts, obviously, no, we'll need to go.
They'll have to work on it.
Yeah, we'll have to work on it. One of the things to take into consideration, again, looking at the configuration of the park, there is a lawn also in the Palm Grove area that while it's not as close to the stage, it could also serve for that purpose, for people spreading out blankets, et cetera.
Flynn, my other question is, if you're standing on the raised portion of the seating where you can either sit on the concrete benches, they're not concrete, I'm sorry, but I forget the term of sedimentary benches, but also standing up on the bluff, basically, will the shade structure in any way affect the sight lines for people who are that far back and that far up?
The shade structure over the stage?
Yes.
No, it won't. It only has 3 poles that holds up the canopy, and so it won't impede views.
Okay, thank you.
And Flynn, do you remember the number of people if they close the street and then also use the stairs of the museum as a seating area?
Yeah, I can't remember if they said somewhere between 800 and 1,000.
I think that's what anybody, Sean, do you remember?
Yeah.
Not to rearrange the whole park here, but just to ask a question about, was there any conversation in the study group about the fact that where the direction that the audience from the lawn is looking at the stage is southwest, and that is the direction the sun is coming at them most of the day until the sun disappears behind the mountains, so that everyone's looking directly into the sun? Any conversation about that? Maybe there should be.
I'm taking those notes down.
Flynn, I'm very impressed that the group talked about using the museum steps in the streets so that it's dual purpose. I think that's absolutely ideal. Just in my past experience in designing parks and whatnot, a 24-inch stage, if you're going to use chair seating, is very low. and people might be standing to look around, especially if it's intended to use for performances. But even in our history here in Palm Springs, when we have rallies and whatnot, they want to be higher so they're seen. A speaker wants to be higher. And if you look at the Palm Desert stage and whatnot, it's much higher than 24 inches. And sometimes they'll, when it's not being used as a stage, like I think you have here, they'll have the seating that's around it. The other thing I was going to comment about, if you're in the museum steps, I totally agree with Kenny, but if you're in the museum steps, does that shade structure block your view from the museum steps to the stage? And then the last thing that I don't know if it's been considered or not, is the whole overall electrical infrastructure for lighting and sound, so that that infrastructure is in place, so that we don't have cords running to the back, of the lawn area, so that you can just plug and play. And I think that infrastructure should be thought out and put in up front.
I think that was one of the very first things they discussed, even when they were discussing it 2 or 3 years ago. So my understanding is that all of the sound infrastructure and lighting will be in place. The other component of the stage, just to answer that, is that the shade structure can be taken down. It's meant to be flexible and put up and taken down. So I think they can work with that.
And again, you can see here in this image that there's only 3 poles holding up the shade structure, and so views of the stage should not be obstructed by that from any direction, essentially.
Has there been any suggestions or discussion about what plant material they're using for the event lawn, or any of the lawns in the area?
Other than turf, no, we haven't.
Turf would be Bermuda grass?
I don't know what variety of turf that they were looking at, and that's not called out here in the drawings. Exactly, that's going to be a concern with dual usage. We want to make sure that it holds up for both events and then for casual use as well. Talking a little bit more about the color theme, they've also provided some information on graphics, signage, and again, general color theme for materials in the park. You can see the palette that they have at the bottom of the page, trying to reflect that both in the design elements as well as the plant materials, and to have that throughout the park area. They are proposing to have a limited amount of movable chairs and tables. You'll see the proposed furniture there on the bottom of the screen. That will primarily be on the edge of the Palm Grove area. There has been some discussion among the subcommittee members. Are those pieces going to be moved? Are we going to lose them? Theft, things like that. So that is a concern of the subcommittee. Just wanted you to be aware of that. The consultant has said that they've used movable furniture in other parks, and based on the weight of the furniture that they've selected, that helps to cut down on the amount of theft when it's very heavy furniture. But there is something very desirable about being able to move chairs around based on the size of your group. There's just a certain wonderful quality in being able to do that. So I think they want to continue with that, but the subcommittee does have concerns about losing the furniture. So I just wanted you to be aware of that.
I'll bring this up here since we have the sign in front of us. Is the name of the park established as the Downtown Park, or is that just a holding?
That's just a holding place for right now. It has not been formally established yet by the City Council. And there have been some thoughts on that issue that have been delivered previously at public input sessions.
For what it's worth, I've seen what appears to be the exact same furniture, just in a different color, used in Grand Park, downtown Los Angeles, and it's spread out all over the place. And I run or walk through that park frequently during the week sometimes, and I don't remember seeing any attrition of furniture disappearing. There's still tons of it spread around. Probably the one thing that I notice most often is that maybe there's nobody in charge of putting it back in a aesthetically pleasing location after it's been moved around. But they seem to be using it there successfully in downtown Los Angeles, for what it's worth.
I thoroughly applaud the use of movable furniture because I think that creates groupings and it creates a socialization in a park that I think what we probably are attending to do. I might suggest that those benches that the tables and the chairs that they're proposing not be metal because we live in the desert, and that they might be something like teak wood or something that is cooler to the touch and not be burnt.
I think that goes to the same concern that we had with the armrests. And I don't know if they can do that with the furniture, but I think that's a good question.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and forward that comment on. There, as Chair Wermick did indicate, there were concerns about the metal armrests on the bench. Again, that they would be too hot during the summer months. So generally, we do have those concerns about that, although we do like the design of them. One of the things, talking about the armrest just briefly, is going back to some of the initial public input that we received, looking at Nellie Kaufman's quote there about space, stillness, solitude, and simplicity, and trying to carry that theme throughout the park. Those armrests gives us the opportunity to have those types of words and images and things like that incorporated into the park. You can see there that stillness would be cut out of that particular armrest, and you could see that theme carried throughout. In addition, one of the other things that they had proposed is doing decorative plaques for the plants within the park, indicating their importance to the Cahuilla tribe. So tying in our history with the tribe as well into the park. Both of those things, I think, are excellent ideas that they brought forward, and we hope to see incorporated in the park as part of the overall theming.
Flynn, I have a question on the armrests. With the effort that was taken to create this sedimentary soil profile of the benches, I guess reflecting the fault lines or the terrain and so forth, were the armrests, because they're so foreign to this naturalistic shape of the walkways, the benches, and the landscape, were those developed to create more of a design element or pattern through the project?
I think it was both to incorporate the design element and then also, as you see here in this image, to convey some of the themes of the park. So I think it was both of those.
And to assist people who need to put their beverage down, need to get up, to sparkle color throughout the park and some of the boldness of Palm Springs colors.
Mm-hmm. So as a direct effort to create some contrast between the natural and the built form.
That's what they told us.
Okay. Yeah. I mean,
Well, and we discussed for a while, and it was pretty well received that there was some color introduced in the built environment in the park during the meeting. That and the functionality of the armrest for drinks and food and things like that, as well as, I'm going out on a limb here, but I'm pretty sure we did talk about skateboarding and how things get torn up with that, and I think these act as a bit of a barrier to alleviate that problem.
Next, we'll go on to the outcrop area and the water feature. Again, one of the reasons for this design feature is to help screen the parking structure there on the north side of the park so that it really does feel like a natural environment. And so they have proposed to do kind of a raised landscape feature here, which will then also serve as a backdrop for the water feature as well. And then in addition to that, giving some raised seating for the event lawn. And so that is the reason for having that. In terms of the appearance, you get an idea here looking from the event lawn back towards the raised terrace with the water feature there off to the right. Another image here looking from the east to the west at the water feature and how there's the sedimentary wall that grows up out of the site and then eventually becomes the facade of the restroom building and the police substation there in the site. Looking at the plant materials, the trees that will be used here in this area, instead of palms, they'll be using the Palo Brea and then also the hybrid mesquite there. You can see illustrated in the yellow and the green on the plan. For the hybrid mesquite, they're proposing to use both a multi-trunk and a standard trunk. The ST indication on the plan is the standard trunk, and so those will be used primarily in areas adjacent to walking paths or where pedestrians would be, with the multi-trunk towards the back where people will not be as close to those trees. And then the understory planting here on the outcrop is a slightly different palette than what we see in the palm grove. One of the things that they're introducing here on the back side of the outcropping is the use of succulents, in particular cacti. There is a concern that we potentially could have people try to get back in that area, which is really not where they want to be or should be. And so we are proposing to use cactus in that area as a way to kind of discourage people there behind, hiding in that landscape or sleeping in that landscape. Again, looking at the color palette, this one is a little bit more limited in terms of the color that's being used, primarily being in flower during the spring and the summer months. Looking here at the water feature and the inspiration for that, going to Tahquitz Falls. Oh, sorry, Robert, you had a question?
I did. How much elevation rise is there in the outcrop?
Let me go to, let's see, this section drawing doesn't show very well in this slide. It rises up to about 10 feet in height at some of the higher portions where the buildings are. There is a portion that's 12 feet right at the fall. So that's the highest point of that portion. Most of it, let's see, I was trying to see if there was another section. No, that doesn't really give you a good idea. You can see here in this section, adjacent to the parking structure, it tapers down to about 4 feet and then goes up as high as 10 feet at the wall itself.
You've got benches, 2 rows of benches that are potentially for the event lawn and the stage. And then behind that, I assume that there's the upper one, there's a path, and then behind that is planting. And is the intent, because when you look at the one rendering, it looks like that the intent of that whole planting area behind that path is not really for pedestrians or the public to enter.
And that's correct. Once we're past the benches and the raised levels, that area behind that is really intended for screening for the understory plants, the trees, and not really intended for people to use.
And then as you look at the wall, as it extends from the spring around and then it returns, it looks like, into the parking garage, what is that area that's, what happens up there?
We have the police substation here on the very right in the image that I've got on the screen.
I'm talking about on the left side.
On the left side?
Where it says ROP, on the site plan, the outcrop, the ROP part. It looks like there's a 4-foot fence or some sort of wall that extends around and returns into the face of the parking garage?
And that's correct. And again, that's to prevent access to the higher part of that slope area, to keep people from trying to get up to the top of the waterfall and jump off, those types of things. So there is a 4-foot high fence there until it dead ends into the wall, and then the wall rises up, the sedimentary wall rises up from that point.
Flynn, I'd like to point out, though, that I've been noticing these things on the section. Could you actually go back to the section, one of the black images, some more technical things? Because I think that 4-foot fence that meanders through the landscape is good for people coming up from the park. But if you look at the section, somebody in the parking garage could jump up over that low concrete wall and onto the berm area, and then potentially continue up to the top of the water element. So just in terms of liability to the city, and to the architect for that matter, having been there before, I think there needs to be some sort of closure at the existing parking structure to not have that possibility.
Okay.
Because somebody theoretically, a kid even, could continue along that landscape area to the roof of the police substation, in which case there's no railing or whatnot. And even probably at the second level of the parking structure, the city should consider something like that as well. Somebody, again, could jump down from the parking structure. And I'm sure Rios could design something quite beautiful in order to, I just hate to see this thing built and then Band-Aids put on it in the future.
Flynn, regarding the water feature, any thought about how it might be abused or used? In other words, it's so easy to just walk into it. I could see it being a wading pool for kids and others on a very hot day. Is there any concern that that might occur?
Yes, in fact, they've designed it so that doesn't occur. One of the things that's unique about the water feature is, although it will have a fall that's coming up over the top of the sedimentary wall, it does not fall into a water basin, but rather there is a basin of large rocks, essentially. So there's no standing water in that at any point in time. And that was particularly to address some of the concerns of the health department, as well as some of the regulatory things that we would have to take into account. If it were some type of a water basin, it would require additional things from us to maintain that, as well as to police that. In addition, the splash pad area, and let's see, the splash pad area will not have any standing water in that area either. It's going to have a seated concrete finish to it, and there will be no standing water, so it's not a pool. City will also be able to control the time that the splash pad operates, so that, overnight or things like that, that people aren't using it for bathing or showering or what have you. So those were all concerns that they had brought up relative to that.
The finish on the splash pad so that children could walk on it as they splashed, and that it didn't get hot. So that hadn't been thought through yet.
Yeah, that was one of the things that the subcommittee had requested, is looking at how hot those materials will get during the summer, and the usability of that area.
Just for clarification, is the splash pad the spring? Are we talking one and the same, or what they call the interactive fountain?
Yeah, the interactive fountain is the splash pad, and then the area here in this plan that I have up on the screen, the waterfall, that is the cascade that you will see as the backdrop to that. In addition to the waterfall and the interactive fountain, they're also going to have a fog system and some lighting to add additional cooling to that area. The fog will both, as I understand it, come from the basin as well from the sedimentary wall. Let's see, and the idea is to have plants that will spill over that sedimentary wall at that portion of the site. Sean and Kathy, am I forgetting anything relative to the fountain?
There was a great deal of discussion of the mechanics of it and how well it could be operated from a park and rec point of view. So I think we spent the greatest portion of our last review on fountain, and it's really a fountain and not a waterfall, but it'll look like a waterfall, on the maintenance, the machinery, and how it would operate, safety. But we missed Doug's point.
Moving on to the restrooms and the police substation. The design that we see here is a little bit different than what was shown in the schematic design to the City Council last October. We had started out with separate men's and women's restrooms that were back off of a hallway, out of concerns for safety, as well as looking at the number of restrooms that we have available. The current thought is to have 4 gender-neutral toilet rooms that have outside doors to them, and then you'll see that there is a multi-station sink behind a partition wall there out in front of those. So there is some degree of separation and privacy from the rest of the park, but that is the proposed restroom design there. The police substation is immediately to the right. It's about 700 square feet in area. It will feature glass walls looking out to the park They'll actually be using a fritted glass design here, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner of this image. So you won't exactly know when the police are looking out to the park. They could be there 24 hours a day. But again, that's the idea of the fritted glass. They will have observation of the park from the police substation there.
On the, you see where it says the police storage and mechanical? It looks like the access is off to the property line, which I'm asking, the question is, number one, is there a right-of-way between the park and the garage that they can access that? And if so, what does that look like at the entries, or how it closes on each of the ends from the public?
I believe that the access to the storage room is directly from the parking structure, so that will just be a door to the parking structure with that right up against the parking structure itself. You will see that there is a planter to the right of that between the parking structure and the back wall of the police substation, and they are showing trees within that area there.
So is there, from the substation, is there a second entrance from the garage that, I mean, I don't know what they're planning to use that storage mechanical area for, but if somebody a policeman needs to get access to it, how does he get there?
They would have to go around through the parking structure. I think primarily that's going to be the mechanical space for the interactive fountain and the water feature. Any pump equipment and things like that is what I'm imagining. Sean?
Yeah, I see the practicality of police using that for storage doesn't really seem to be there. And so I made a note of that to bring that up at our next meeting. But I know that we did spend quite a bit of time. The substation itself, as well as a detailed floor plan, is forthcoming during the next presentation, I believe, at which they want to spend a fair amount of time working with the police department on their exact needs there, and I believe they're rethinking some of that. They expressed the need for storage as well as a bathroom for access just for themselves privately. Quite a bit of time was spent on that, so I know they're thinking some of that through a bit more, and that is true. They were going to use a fair amount of that space for the pump house for the water feature itself. The bathrooms, we did spend a good bit of time on that also. Some concerns were brought up about security and people using those bathrooms for things they shouldn't be, and at the same time, it was commented that the hours of operation that the police will be using that seemed like the intent is in short time, it will be 24 hours a day. Not right away, but almost full-time right away, and then 24 hours a day, I think.
Yeah, I think that was correct. Not initially, but the intent is that eventually they will have 24-hour service there.
Is the reason for that to have a full-time, 24/7 downtown presence generally, not just for the park purposes?
Yes, it is. They currently have some office space on Indian Canyon.
Right.
The idea is they're going to move to this location.
And they wanted to rework what was planned here so that it works for them. I think they hadn't bought off on everything I think they wanted a little more space.
Flynn or Sean, maybe, what is the path of travel? I'm still following up on the question about the access from the substation into the parking structure, because I'm assuming that the police would want to have a number of parking spaces within the parking structure immediately adjacent to the substation. And I'm sure there is a way to get there, but the path of travel really isn't indicated on any of these drawings, and I think they should be.
Actually, there's not really any path of travel identified for the general public. They might want to use the parking structure to access the park.
Flynn, going back to the plan diagram for this area, it indicates that there's a mechanical pump room and a water tank under the mound, under the outcrop. And again, the question is how you access that for servicing. And that would be next to the police storage mechanical.
Okay. I'm assuming that that is also accessed from the parking structure as well, from the back side of the parking structure, but that's something that we can verify with the consultant, looking at the accessibility of all of those items there.
On the diagram that shows the plan view of the substation and the planter, it appears that to the right on the drawing of the planter, that the hardscape goes right up to the parking structure, and then further to the right, there's like another raised cutout or landscape area. Is that possibly the access, or should that be another ground level planter to screen? It shows the tree canopies hanging over, but I'm just wondering what's happened at the ground level.
Yeah, that's something that we'll need some additional information on. I believe in terms of the path of travel, there is going to be an access point there at the southeast corner of the garage that you would go through the Forever Maryland Plaza, the Art Plaza, into the garage at that point. But you would have to travel around that planter. But looking at the treatment of the wall there, I think is...
Yeah, whether that planter should extend all the way to that island cutout to the right.
Maybe this is a question for the subcommittee. The doors into the private gender-neutral toilet stalls, I'm not seeing any overhang of any type over those. And, again, those would, I'm certain will be metal doors with metal handles facing south. So going back to some of those concerns about things getting hot, I think that might be a good location to recommend to the architects that some sort of sun canopy is put on those. Might even be a nice design element too.
One more thing, on the access doors to the public restrooms, I don't think they meet ADA. You need the 18 or 24 inches on the strike side of the doors, and it does not look like that's there.
Flynn, are we keeping a tape of this for the, is this being recorded so that we can share this with the architects?
Yeah, and again, I will transpose our comments here, which is why I'm furiously writing between your comments. Let me just go, let's see, we've been through this. Just going back to the street trees, that we are using the Tippewana trees that we already have on Bellardo, and so that will be consistent there on the east side of the park. We will be using the date palms along Museum Way, so that's consistent, and we'll forward those comments on the hardscape back to the subcommittee. And then on the street in front of the Art Museum, Museum Drive, those will be the Washingtonian Folifera, which will continue down that street. So there is consistency in terms of the street treatment on all of those streets. One of the questions we had earlier, I think Mr. Woods, you brought this up relative to lighting and the infrastructure there. They do have a lighting plan proposed for the park and looking at how they're going to light the different elements. You can see that here in this image, that it's going to be a combination of lighting rings on the palm trees, providing uplighting and downlighting. There will also be some light within the landscape, both uplights and downlights indicated there as the yellow triangles and the orange triangles. Then the downlights on the buildings themselves, the police substation and the restrooms. And so that gives you kind of an overall picture of the lighting that's proposed throughout the site. They've also done the study in terms of the foot candles to make sure that there's adequate lighting throughout all areas of the park, while trying to observe as much as we can, trying to keep within the dark sky ordinance, trying not to overlight the park, but keeping it safe. And so they have evaluated that as well. One of the last things, while we don't need to get into the specifics of the budget on this, one of the concerns from the consultants is that there's some additional site work and work relative to the parking structure that isn't incorporated as part of this budget. For example, there is currently we call it the pit, what was once the the loading for the mall, when the mall was in place, that loading ramp is still there. That's something that's not included in their budget. There's also some work to the stairwells into the parking structure. The Illuminaire site is not included in this budget. So there's a number of things that are not included in the specific budget that we have for the park. The consultant has identified some concerns that if we have to use some of the park funds to pay for those, that we would then need to look at what do we reduce or cut down in the park. And so some of the things that they've discussed is replacing the sedimentary finish on the walls of the restroom building and the police substation as maybe one of the cost savings. Also looking at perhaps removing the metal armrests from the concrete benches, reducing perhaps the number of palm trees within the palm grove, and then reducing the overall length of the sedimentary walls. So they're looking at things that could be cut out without cutting down on the overall aesthetic of the park if we had to do that. Now, the city is actively looking at some of the things that we can accommodate through other funding sources. Our concern, obviously, is we want to have the park as the way that the consultants have designed it. We're very happy with the aesthetic that they've come up with and the treatment that they've come up with. So I just want you to be aware of that. One of the other concerns, I had mentioned this earlier, was relative to the shading in the palm grove, if that would be adequate. And does there need to be some type of temporary shade structures as perhaps an art feature or something like that added to the park? And so that's one thing that the subcommittee has discussed as a potential thing to be added that we would need to accommodate in the budget. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. The city does have the funding available. The consultant has built in about $300,000 of cushion into the budget in terms of between doing the analysis now versus when we start construction in 2019, how much are prices going to rise on materials and things like that. So there is some cushion in that budget, but just wanted you to be aware of those discussions relative to the budget. With that, that concludes my presentation to you in terms of the slides. Be happy to take any additional questions or comments you might have that you want to forward on to the subcommittee. So we'll go ahead and do that now.
Yeah. Maybe it's in the package. I haven't seen it. There is some, monument signage and so forth identifying the park. Is there directional signage, let's say, for people to know where the restrooms are, to know the path of travel to the parking structure and vice versa? I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's sort of line of sight, but
Yeah.
some of those things may be. So I'm sure that could be easily rolled into the package.
Yeah, and they have not provided those to us yet, so that's a good comment.
As an overall, my impression is this is an excellent proposal. My only concern, and this just may be because spatial reasoning was never my forte in school, but this is a very small site when you think about it being less than 2 acres. It's funny when I look at it, it doesn't seem that way, but it is. Was there any thought or any conversation among subcommittee members about the fact that perhaps we're trying to do too much on this site, that it's a bit too busy for the size of the site, and can it be enjoyed by as many people as possible, given the fact that with the outcroppings and the other plantings, you've got a lot of areas that are not publicly friendly at all that people can't be enjoying. So I'm just wondering how this is going to look in practice with so much going on in such a small space. Now that just may be me. I'm not sure whether anyone else raised that or not.
Let me just offer a couple of comments, then I'll ask the subcommittee members to chime in if you wouldn't mind. Keeping in mind that the park is going to be used as a passive park, 95% of the time is what I would imagine, that it's going to be, people coming out on their lunch hour to enjoy it, or visitors on weekends, things like that. That for that experience, it's more than adequate in terms of the amount of seating that's available, the lawn space, things like that. It's when we start to incorporate events that concerns about how many users can enjoy the park, that it starts to become a question. I think the consultants have done a good job in terms of their allocation of space with the size of the park in mind, in terms of how we use it for events where there's a staged concert, thinking about how we use it when we can close off the streets adjacent to the park. I think they've done a generally good job of thinking about that. Keep in mind, for example, during Thursday nights, Village Fest, thank you, sorry. During Village Fest, that this becomes an extension of Village Fest in a way, that it gives us additional space to have events related to Village Fest. So those are my thoughts, that again, 95% of the time, it's going to be a passive use park. It's only, the special occasions, special events, things like that, where it will need to accommodate more. And Kathy and Sean, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that.
Just that we didn't discuss it in detail, whether it was too much or not, and I think that there was a fair amount of thought given to the circulation spaces, the widths, the amount of people that they're showing in plan view, although they didn't capture every potential scenario with blankets and wine bottles and things like that. Don't know whether that's allowed or not, but it seems like there was a fair amount of thought given to that. To me, and I think that was our general take on it at the last presentation, I only see three really core components here: the spring water feature area, the forest, and the open grass area where the theater is. The art at the east end there. So I don't know, given the amount of space they have, to me, I don't know that I share the same opinion on that. Doesn't seem too busy to me. And I don't think it did to anyone else at the last presentation.
Think about what they did with the old Rand site in Santa Monica where they put a park in. And it has some of the same features of some raised areas, walk-through areas, spaces that people can be. And it's the most used park in the city. People sit there, they lunch there. It's really created a nice space, and I think they're capable of doing it. And I thought they put the same amount. I think this is a little bit smaller, but that has more features. But I think especially the raised area takes a little bit away, but masking the parking structure is a really important element in making this park aesthetically beautiful as well. So I felt pretty comfortable with it, and having sat on the park subcommittee through the earlier iterations, I think this is so much more usable than what we started with several years ago.
I think it's a really beautiful design. My initial reaction was that when it's built, it's going to feel much smaller than the drawings look. And that was the same experience I had, a reaction I had when they opened the park in Santa Monica at the Rand site. I don't know that you would reduce anything, but I think the overall impression that people will have of this is a grand space, and the reality is it's going to be small. So.
I think we missed bicycle parking. And I think what we don't want to have happen is bicycles leaning against the benches or bicycles brought onto the lawn, when you're trying to have a concert, and actually organizing a place for them to park or scooters. Yes, a big problem in some parts of the city. So I just think that we need to look at that, not only from multimodalism, but just how the park is used in that sense. I just also want to reiterate Kenny's point about looking into the sun. It's better to put pen to paper now than it is to spend $6 million and find out we made a mistake, just to kind of flesh that out a little bit. And I just want to reiterate the height of the stage. I really do think it needs to be a little bit higher. Personally, and you'll get tons of opinions, I don't like the color of the stage shade. It reminds me of sorority colors from college. And I don't think that was the intent, but it will conjure up stuff like that with people. So it just maybe you're going to get 100 opinions on that. Thank you.
To piggyback on that, as I was looking at the staging and thinking about how they would stage concerts there, I was worried that if we were thinking that we might try to use the steps in front of the museum, and this is something that happened, the performance happens in the day or the afternoon before the mountain has cast the shadow, I would see performers wanting to drop something behind them to shade them from the sun that's beating down onto their back, and then that cuts the view from the steps across the street immediately. Also, as they're looking at staging and power, also they might want to keep in mind that an amplified performance or a performance using lighting, a spotlight or a camera will need some sort of an engineering area where they set up a technical booth. And if they're going to be running power to the stage, they might want to run power to an area that could accommodate a booth for all that technical equipment, because otherwise they're going to have those rubber humps running back and forth that people have to step over. Just something to think ahead on.
I just, and I was at the presentations where they had the 3 different designs and you know, so I saw the whole design process go through. But I think my only comment or question on this is at the southeast corner of the park site, is there enough of a entry plaza or a connection to the downtown, the new downtown development? I know at one time the Maryland statue was proposed for that corner, but it feels like, you know, we're over by the museum on the southwest corner of the park site, you know, where the stage is, there's like a plaza area, but I almost feel like there needs to be a gesture on the southeast corner as like a welcoming plaza or something, if that needed to be like an expanded event area or if that was explored.
Yeah. If I remember correctly from the signage slide, let's see. You can see here in this image there was going to be kind of a low wall sign there at the southeast corner. But your comment is a good one in terms of what is that entry sequence or that welcoming feature there at the southeast corner.
I could see, you know, if there's an event, a lot of people wanting to set up on that corner just because it has so much visibility, where that may be one of the main entrances into the park itself.
Just one small comment on the height of the stage, and it's not a technical comment. The stage, I think, was at a low height so that it could be used as a seating area when it wasn't a performance area. So the goal was a dual purpose for that stage. They raised with us.
Well, I think the other issue with the stage, sure, it would be nice to have it taller for performances, but then you get into ADA issues, you know, railings and things like that. So it's just a whole sort of domino effect. You know, listening to Commissioner Donenfeld, that was my first reaction to this whole composition as well. Is trying to do so much, and I agree, it's not a big space. But I think Flynn, you know, sort of expressed, or what I've come to the realization is that this should really be truly that oasis space. It should be a passive relaxation space. I think the water elements are great. Personally, I think, you know, the stage, it's nice to have, but I don't see it as a major performance venue. And, you know, to go to Tom's comment just now about that sort of entry plaza idea, I think there's already so much hardscape with the sidewalks and the streets and so forth that once you start, you know, adding another plaza or gateway or whatever, you're even diminishing the softscape, the trees even more. You know, if there is a sort of a street fair, a major arts fair or something like that, I would see all the streets surrounding being closed for booths, for additional, you know, portable toilets and things like that, or even, to be honest, a larger stage that would be wired, would have the sound, the technical booth capabilities and so forth. You know, I think it's too, we're almost at the point where we're trying to do too much with this park. It's unfortunate, actually. I think that the police substation has to take up real estate, that the restrooms have to take up quite a bit of real estate. But, you know, they are necessities. But I think sort of the balance that Rios has established with the trails and sort of the naturalistic elements is really, really good. And, you know, the shade structure over the stage, I tend to agree with some of the colors. You know, they're a bit loud maybe, but you know, I think there's still time to make that work. I guess that was my comment.
You did tell us that the stage could be expanded with portable materials, and that they had designed it that way. Any other comments? Lynn?
Just that the Maryland situation just looks like it's sort of added on. At this point, I'm not sure that would be the best location in town for it anyway.
That is the controversy.
Madam Chair, if there's no additional comments, what I'll go ahead and do is write out my summary of your comments that you've given here today. I'll provide those to the subcommittee so that we have them. The next subcommittee meeting is on July the 16th. Again, there is going to be a presentation to the City Council. I don't know if it'll be at the July 11th or the July 18th City Council meeting, but they'll also be looking at the 50% design development drawings as well. Again, thank you to the members of the AAC and the Planning Commission for your comments, for reviewing this. We appreciate your time and your thoughtfulness about this project. And again, it's something that we look forward to seeing built here very shortly. So thank you. With that, Madam Chair, we can go ahead and conclude the meeting. We're going to leave some additional time for public comment if...
Are members of the public who would like to comment now that you've seen the design and heard the presentations? You're welcome to come forward. No further comments from the public. The joint session of the Planning Commission and the Architectural Advisory Committee. And I'm adjourning our meeting until 1:30 this afternoon.